It was a great, great honor and pleasure to be able to host this event. Those of you I have had the honor of meeting, my name is Rabbi Mark Wilds. I'm the founder of Manhattan Jewish Experience, Jewish outreach program for 20s and 30s. The age went up a little tonight. We want to welcome all of you for being here. And we are joining tonight. Where's your sign? We are joining tonight with This World, which is Rabbi Shmuley Boteach's wonderful organization, This World Values Network. And it is really an honor to be able to host such distinguished leaders in the Jewish community and in the world. I want to first welcome my friend, excuse my back, Jason, Special Assistant to the President for International Negotiations. I've known Jason for many, many years. Had the honor of growing up together in Forest Hills, Queens. We went to the same elementary school, high school, and college, and we watched each other's families grow over the years. And I just really want to say, just at the outset, how proud I am as an old friend of Jason and the tremendous, what I consider to be Kiddush Hashem, the sanctification of God's name that he has made in representing the United States in what could be arguably the most delicate and difficult aspect of U.S. diplomacy, and that is some kind of eventual peace plan between Israel and the Palestinian people. And I just really want to tell you, Jason, how wonderful it is to have you here and how you have represented our beloved country with dignity and integrity, always looking out, of course, first and foremost for the United States, but also for Israel, and forging forward with efforts to create some kind of framework for peace. It is truly an honor to call you a friend, and I thank you for being here. And then we also welcome Bret Stevens, and I'm a secret admirer. He's got many. He is a New York Times Pulitzer Prize winning columnist whose writing I have been reading for many years, and who brings such depth, insight, and much needed reason to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and so many other issues of our time. And I want to thank you, Mr. Stevens, for being here tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, to Rabbi Shmuley, without whom none of this would be possible, and for being such an important force in our community. And what I also believe, bringing an authentically Jewish and spiritual voice to the issues of our day. Everybody here knows how much Shmuley loves Israel and what a fierce defender and advocate of Israel, which sometimes is becoming less and less of a popular thing today. So I want to thank you, Shmuley, for sharing this with MGE and for giving us the opportunity. And just want to, before I hand over the microphone, to give you, Jason, to Bret, and all of us here a bracha for the new year to come. We just had an Israeli election. We're going to get into that tonight. But whoever is voted through Israel's democracy into power should be a tremendous blessing to the Jewish people, to our brothers and sisters in Israel, to all of America, and to the entire world. Shana Tova Mutagah should be a sweet, happy, healthy year.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rabbi Wilds. We love being at MJE. I'm not going to do any long introductions because I want this to be a substantive, fast-moving discussion because there's so many important issues to address. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Let's jump straight into this. Jason Greenblatt has been at the center of world events for the past 3 years as a special representative to the President of the United States for international negotiations, in which capacity he has served as the lead negotiator of the United States of America in the Middle East. Very important position, trying to solve intractable problems, and we're very grateful for Jason being here, and honored. And we've had many public discussions together. Bret Stevens, Pulitzer Prize winning columnist of the New York Times. And as I begin, I just want to make one special welcome. We're so honored that Marion Wiesel is joining us this evening. Thank you very much for being here, Marion. We value everything that you and Ellie have done for the Jewish people and what you continue to do for the Jewish people. And God bless you wherever you are, where you make the place sparkle. So thank you for being here. Jason, you announced that you're going to be leaving this position of lead negotiator. People are confused. Why are you leaving? When are you leaving? And what happens with the plan that you've crafted?
This was a tough decision for me and for my family. I had originally signed up for about 2 years. We're now closing in on close to 3 years. We, as a father and as a husband, I have obligations back home in New Jersey. I've neglected my family. My wife has been working harder than ever, and the time has come. It's a good time for me to do it, A, because we have made dramatic progress connecting Israel with the Arab world. We have made dramatic progress reconnecting, or strengthening, I should say, the U.S.-Israel relationship. President Trump has made some very historic and courageous decisions between Jerusalem, the embassy, the Golan, so many other things. We've studied the conflict, we've learned the conflict, we've heard all the arguments, and we have finished the peace plan. I'm not leaving tomorrow. They've asked me to, the White House has asked me to stay on until the launch of the peace plan, but I think it's going to depend on what today really turned out to be, how long it's going to be before we could actually launch the peace plan, and I expect to be leaving in the coming weeks, coming month or two, if we don't launch. My hope is that there will be a launch, but I am leaving it in excellent hands. The team is still there, led by Jared Kushner, Ambassador David Friedman, Avi Berkowitz, Brian Hook. There's a whole team of people that have been working on this. And I guess I'll end, because I know people are confused, but imagine if I would have announced my departure after this election, the theories and conjecture and guesses that would have happened. So I left at the most quiet period I think that I could have. I made the announcement during the most quiet period that I think I could have.
Because this might be the last public discussion we have with you in your current position, I want to push the boundaries a little bit. You know my deep respect for you. So if there's anything that you feel you still cannot discuss because you remain in your position, you'll tell me. What about the people who are saying that Jason therefore is hedging his bets? That he's leaving before the plan can be tested? Because I kind of feel that you're not being given credit that you deserve for what you achieved in terms of Israel's relationship with the Gulf states, with the whole focus being on whatever's in the plan with the Palestinians, when really you achieved so much, but everyone's still focused on an unpublished plan, and I think it's kind of a disservice to you, if I can say so respectfully.
No disrespect. I wish I could stay longer, I really do, and I'm proud of the work we've done. I know my colleagues will try to keep pushing the envelope and continue to do more. But at some point I have to say, I do have to go home. So I wish I could stay. I wish I could see whatever it is that they're going to accomplish all the way through together with them. I just can't anymore. Okay,
just staying on this subject for a moment. But you achieved monumental things. Look, David Friedman gets a lot of the credit for moving the embassy. It was the president's decision, of course, but you were part of that team. You were part of the team and you were there when the president recognized the Golan Heights. But most importantly, you were the central person who kind of changed the relationship between Israel and the Gulf states, Bahrain, Oman, Saudi Arabia, UAE. There's been a monumental change. Now, it may not be written in a peace agreement. It may not be acknowledged as much as it should be. But the general consensus is that there's a total shift in how the Gulf states deal with Israel, approach Israel, think about Israel. And I would venture to say that you deserve that credit more than anyone in this administration, with the possible exception, of course, of the president himself, because he guides all administration policy. And I kind of feel that you're not being given credit for that. And as your friend, I feel you do deserve the credit. And I don't understand, why wasn't that seen as part of the plan? Because you could not have achieved anything in the Middle East without first getting Gulf states on board, accepting Israel's permanence, accepting Israel's existence, seeing that peace with Israel or cooperation with Israel would lead to economic prosperity across the board throughout the Middle East, etc. And you were responsible for so much of that, and you're highly respected among the leadership of the Gulf states.
So I think this really has been very much a team approach. First of all, I think it was the theme set forth by the president in May of 2017 when he spoke in Riyadh. We explained that it is essential for Israel to be welcomed into that neighborhood. It's good for them, it's good for Israel. In retrospect, I have to laugh when I looked at the president's remarks before he gave them and I saw that Israel was sprinkled through the remarks. Maybe I added one or two, I don't remember. I realized we had reached too low. Here we are 2.5 years later, and as you said, we have made remarkable progress. In March of 2017, when I first went to the Arab world and met all of the foreign ministers of the regional countries, We had great, frank, honest discussions, one-on-one in private rooms. And people would say, some of them would say, Israel, Israel. But nobody would talk about it out loud. Nobody would talk about the relationships that we have. But fast forward to this period of time. We have the Prime Minister of Israel going to Amman. We have the Hatikva being sung in Abu Dhabi. We have so much change. I don't think we could have predicted this almost 3 years ago. I really don't. I think everybody deserves credit, and not just our administration, by the way. I think the Prime Minister of Israel deserves credit. I think the Arab leaders themselves deserve credit. So I'm just grateful that we got this far, and I hope they can continue to do more.
Okay, I'm not going to belabor this point more, other than I have to still stay on this one last time and say, but you also deserve a lot of the credit. And I'm kind of amazed that it's one thing, it's almost like you want to be as humble as I am, which is impossible. Because of all of my incredible virtues, my humility stands out the most. But Jason, yeah, people deserve credit, but you deserve the most credit insofar as that was your role. Your role was to go to the Arab states, the Gulf states, the Palestinians. They cut off negotiations after a while. And your role was to change the dynamic. And there really has been an incredible shift in that dynamic. And as someone who kind of watched this up close, I kind of want you to leave the White House with the credit that you deserve, because I think this is historic. I think what you've done in terms of Israel's relationship with the Gulf states and the non-hostility we're seeing from the Gulf states towards Israel. And I was in Warsaw. I saw them all sitting with Israel. I was in the room. That was the most incredible conference, speaking about Iranian aggression, which was now, I guess, almost prophetic given what we think was an Iranian attack against Saudi oil fields. It was an incredible conference, and I think you deserve so much of the credit. Why are you afraid to take that credit?
I have really great partners, so we all get a lot of credit.
Bret, do you see, let's first speak about Jason's contribution, and we'll talk about the Israeli elections, so many other things. By the way, you told me not to overdo it about all of your accomplishments, so I'm going to underdo it. You don't know anything about the Middle East, Bret Stephens. Now do you feel more comfortable? Let's first frame, Jason has been part of this peace team. What do you see as their accomplishments? What do you see as the things that remain unaccomplished?
First of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and particularly an honor to be in Mrs. Wizel's company, so thank you for having me. If I can be partly facetious, I think all the credit really belongs to the President, President Obama. Because only by pushing forward the JCPOA that he was able to finally deserve the Nobel Prize that he had won in the first year of his presidency, by at last uniting the entire Sunni world with the state of Israel in united opposition to American policy. That's a great achievement. I really don't think that we discussed that enough. Let me make a few points. Again, I'm tagged as an ever-Trumper. I'm in favor of the president when he does things I like, and the president did a number of things that I think really were very significant. Moving the embassy to Jerusalem against the united advice of the kind of foreign policy class. Somehow the world didn't erupt into the Arab world. Streak didn't erupt. People accepted it. And it was an overdue recognition of reality. It was an overdue recognition that when there's a law in the United States, presidents ought to abide by the law and implement it. And that's what the Trump administration did. Recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights was, I think, not only strategically wise, it was an act of kind of diplomatic hygiene to say that the Golan Heights should never be returned to Syria under any circumstances. And it's remarkable, or it's terrifying rather, to think of what would have happened if 20 years ago the negotiations at Shepherdstown between the Ehud Barak government and Hafez Assad had resulted in the return of the Golan Heights. What would Israel's strategic position be today? So that recognition was overdue, and it was great thing to do. And finally, withdrawal from the JCPOA, I think was of crucial importance. Now, I have criticisms of the Trump administration as well, and I am. And I think they ought to. I think they really ought to be mentioned. I think we are leaving Assad in power. I think there is a risk that we are on the cusp of betraying the Kurdish friends who decimated ISIS for us, and without whom not only could we not have won the war, but we could see potentially the return of ISIS. We might be on the cusp of making precisely the same mistake, not only in eastern Syria and northern Iraq, but potentially with any agreement with the Taliban, making exactly the same mistake that the Obama administration made vis-a-vis Iraq by withdrawing, creating a vacuum, and letting the worst possible people flourish within that vacuum. I am confused as to U.S. policy toward Iran, having wisely withdrawn from the JCPOA and sanctioned the Iranian regime the way it has. The president has, I think, very foolishly offered a meeting with no preconditions with Rouhani. And I might say I'm also disconcerted by the rationale that the president gave in summarily, and by the way, I should say in a very ugly manner, dismissing John Bolton the way he did. I don't understand why the president felt the compulsion to sort of announce that a man who was prepared to resign was in fact fired. But leaving that aside, Bolton had prevented what I think were some potential foreign policy fiascos, all of which affect Israel, including a potential agreement with North Korea, and now the possibility of renewed diplomatic contact with Iran. So I think it's a mixed ledger, but I do give the administration real credit for holding Israel close, for making good on its diplomatic and military guarantees, and for understanding, and if I may say capitalizing on the Obama administration's unintended achievement, by understanding that if you can't solve Israel's problems or conflict with the Palestinians, the way to go about it is to sort of encircle the problem. If you can't solve a small problem, enlarge it. That was actually a Kissingerian insight going back to the early 1970s. If you can't solve the Vietnam problem, become an ally with China against the Soviet Union. That's what Kissinger was able to do. And I think what the Trump administration and you in particular have wisely seen is that if you can capitalize on a de facto alliance between Israel and the Gulf countries, Israel and the Kingdom, Israel and Egypt and Jordan, it puts the Palestinians in a very different position in the long term, because they no longer can rely on the Arab League to provide them with a kind of diplomatic and, if you will, quote-unquote, moral oxygen on which the hardline Palestinian movement has survived and thrived these past decades. It might actually force, at some point, the Palestinians to negotiate in good faith, and I think that's an achievement on their part.
The peace plan, the deal of the century, was always portrayed as a deal between Israelis and the Palestinians. But Bret is saying that one of the most significant accomplishments of the administration, he charts it to the beginning of the Obama administration, when Obama unwisely did the JCPOA, was to unite the Middle East against Iran, and then which opened the possibility of Israel having relationships with more of the Gulf states. And the Trump administration did move that forward. Why hasn't it been highlighted more? Number one. Number two, what about what Bret is saying, that the president was so courageous in taking us out of the Iran deal, unilaterally. He said it was the worst deal ever. And now it seems that, the Saudi attack may have changed the calculus, but it did seem like he was prepared to meet Rouhani at the upcoming United Nations General Assembly.
So I think, just to touch on Bret's last point first, I think what we did is we contextualized the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. For decades, people have been saying that it's the core conflict of the Middle East. For decades, people have been saying if we solve that problem, the Middle East will be an oasis of peace. We all know that's not true. It's not true at all. So now we understand that although we want to achieve peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, although we want to help Palestinians have better lives, obviously improving Israel's security in the process, this is a conflict. It is one of many conflicts raging around the world, including several in the Middle East, and it is not going to solve any of those other conflicts that are raging. We point the finger at Iran. The JCPOA cancellation was one of those issues. The Saudi attack should make Saudi Arabia even more understand how they are just like Israel. They are threatened by extremist, terrorist, and countries like Iran who want to take over the region. And I hope they take that to heart. So we have, part of our strategy very much was to explain to the world what this conflict really is all about. As far as the meeting with Rouhani, I don't work on Iran, so I'm speaking a little bit out of school, but my understanding is if there was to be a meeting at all, it would be true without preconditions, but without lifting of sanctions. So the president is a negotiator. I think his view is if I could have a meeting and see if these people really are truly willing to change, perhaps there's an opening there. And if there isn't, then nothing's going to happen. So it's not for me to say whether it's right or wrong, it's just not my file. But I think knowing him, knowing how he does deals, a conversation without a lifting of sanctions probably does no harm.
Okay, and that was the administration's argument about North Korea, that you can meet with Kim Jong-un, and as long as you don't remove sanctions, there's no harm done in trying to get a deal. And maybe the argument could be made that at least with North Korea, they weren't threatening genocide against a United Nations member state. I don't know, is North Korea speaking about annihilating South Korea? Bret would know better than me. The point I'm making is, the problem with no preconditions in any talks with Rouhani is that the one precondition ought to be, even as they engage in this maximum pressure, increased sanctions, which has been very effective, and that's what was ineffective about President Obama. He relieved the sanctions. The one precondition has got to be they have to stop saying they're going to kill all the Jews. They have to stop saying that they're going to engage in genocide. And that's what's so disappointing me about President Obama. That's where President Obama, on the moral issue, really lost me, that he was prepared to do this deal while Iran continually threatened Israel with annihilation. I remember telling my close friend Cory Booker that even, it was a very painful thing if he was going to vote for the deal, but at the very least, go to the floor of the Senate and say, we're not going to even talk to Iran until they stop saying that they're going to kill all the Jews. I mean, Bret, am I making a valid point here? And then I'll ask Jason to weigh in. That should be the one precondition of any talks with Iran, the end of genocidal rhetoric.
If the Iranians said, okay, I mean, the Iranians don't say we're going to kill all the Jews. They say they're going to kill the Zionist, entity. That's the Iranian one. Look, I'm not against a negotiation with the Iranians at some point. I just think that the proper way in which to negotiate with the Iranian regime, and let me be specific about, I'm speaking of the Iranian regime, the despots of Tehran, not the Iranian people, is to negotiate with our foot proverbially on their neck. And the moment you have these sort of meetings, as President Trump has had with Kim Jong-un, who has threatened to strike the United States with atomic weapons, whose rhetoric is always extreme and unpalatable, to say the least, is the moment you enter into a negotiation, the moment you pretend you have a personal relationship, right? All sorts of things start to come down almost by way of niceties. So, for example, we no longer conduct the kind of serious military drills that we used to with South Korea. That's an objective gain for the North. There are doubts about our willingness to maintain sizable forces in South Korea for the indefinite future. That's an objective gain. There's a question about whether the United States wants to remain engaged in Northeast Asia. And the same process could happen if the president were to meet with Rouhani and then say, well, I've met with Rouhani, we have this fantastic relationship, we're going to meet, and in the interim, I'm going to, for example, temporarily lift sanctions from his foreign minister, Javad Zarif. A few months ago or so, he slapped sanctions on Zarif. This is a regime that just shot down a $130 million American drone, has probably, from what we can tell, conducted a cruise missile and drone strikes on one of the most strategic petroleum energy sector sites in the country, seized ships on the high sea in repeated acts of piracy, and now they're going to get the imprimatur and the prestige of a meeting with the president, and I think that's extremely concerning. I mean, the correct policy vis-a-vis the Iranians is to say, here's the deal, we are going to crush your economy until we can verifiably demonstrate that you can never acquire the instruments that you need in order to build, assemble, and deliver nuclear weapons, period. And that should be the way in which we negotiate with them. And I'm frankly afraid that the president is looking for a quote-unquote diplomatic victory by way of greasing his way towards re-election that we are going to regret 2, 3, or 4 years down the road, because his considerations from now until November 2020 are going to be political.
Well, I have to challenge you on that for a moment, because to be fair to President Trump, it wouldn't be a political victory for him. His base is mostly evangelical Christian voters who probably detest Iran, detest the regime, don't want to see any easing of anything on Iran. He would probably have to go against his base, let alone the fact that the majority of his support in the Jewish community is the pro-Israel community, who likewise would be opposed to talks with Iran. So I mean, even I'm confused about the president's engagement with Iran, insofar as I understand it. I can't claim to understand it. So how could this be a political victory for him when his base would probably be opposed to it?
If the president told his base that from now on that everyone should be a member of a nudist colony, that would be like the new evangelical line among Christians. I mean, this is one of like, at some point in the future, political psychologists are going to have to study how it is possible that the same evangelical Christians who had aneurysms exploding over President Clinton's behavior vis-a-vis one of his interns, and who spoke constantly about the depth of outrage, have complete comfort with the president's relations with pornographic actresses. How is it possible that the same movement that used to say that Christian compassion and charity doesn't stop at the Rio Grande now treats the same desperate migrants who are coming from Honduras and so on as MS-13 or Hezbollah or whatever terrorists? So how has President Trump achieved this? I don't know. It is one of the great political magic tricks of recent history. So if the president now goes to the evangelical base and says, I've solved your problems in the Middle East, I now have a much better deal than Obama ever did, I'm confident that that same base of all the Reverend Falwells and so on would move right in his corner, because the things that they're interested in have very little to do with the strategic, advantages of our position in the Middle East or even the state of Israel.
Sorry, let me respond to this, and then I'd like to move the conversation back to Israel and its neighbors. I can't sit here with certainty and say that the right approach is to have a precondition, as opposed to say the arguments that you're making and the statement about killing Jews or annihilating Israel, should that be a precondition or should it be in a meeting between the president and Rouhani? I'm confident that it would be in a meeting with President Rouhani, and maybe that is the better approach. But I do know, to touch on your Iranian regime versus the people, you have Iranians who are suffering there, the same way you have Palestinians suffering in Gaza. If there is no dialogue, you don't fix problems. If you insist on preconditions, sometimes you get away with it, sometimes you don't get away with it. The last thing I'll say is I have trust that President Trump, who was the only one who was going to, who I think was the only one who was going to actually rip up the agreement as quickly as he did, I have trust that he will not, even in a meeting like that, go the road that you fear. I just don't believe that is him. I've known him for 23 years. I think he called it out for what it was, and I don't think he's going to try to convince people that he could do a deal just for political purposes.
I'm just curious, since we're having a wide-ranging conversation. Had it not been for the fact that the Taliban decided to attack a convoy in Kabul with a car bomb and murder an American sergeant in the process, we would have had a Taliban delegation at Camp David on the eve of the 18th anniversary of September 11th. It was the Taliban that harbored and kept safe Osama bin Laden, refused to deliver him to the United States, lied about his whereabouts, and defended him when we were attacked and 3,000 Americans were murdered. It was just a fluke that the Taliban conducted that operation a week early rather than a week late. And I'm just wondering what the president thought he was doing in nearly concluding this deal with the group that harbored the people who killed us on 9/11.
Let me see if I can give you an analogy, and I'm not trying to compare the tragedies whatsoever, but when I first met President Abbas in March of 2017, I got so much flack. How could you meet this guy who does X, Y, and Z, who supports the pay-to-slave program for the Palestinian Authority to pay Palestinians who kill Israelis, who allows his textbooks to be used with anti-Semitic rhetoric, who never condemns terrorism against Israel, you name it, I got a laundry list of things. But here we are nearly 3 years later, and I go back to those people, and they understand that it is not in Israel's long-term interest not to solve this conflict if it can be solved. But it has to be done in a methodical way, not by giving up on our principles. We are still out there, day in and day out, condemning the pay-to-slave program, condemning the anti-Semitism, condemning the lack of condemnation. We stand firm with our principles, but we have tried to have a dialogue. If we fail, that's okay. But without dialogue, nothing's going to happen. If we weaken ourselves, if we have the dialogue and give up this and that and start giving back money, even though we say, oh, you shouldn't get the money from us, but we want to have a conversation with you, or we'll give you money to come to the peace negotiating table. I don't believe in any of that. But we do say to them, if you want to have peace, if you want to have a better life for your people, you'll come to the table for the deal. If you don't like the deal, don't sign it. I don't care.
And when President Obama said he was willing to speak to figures like Hugo Chavez and other despots without preconditions, the conservative world rose united in opposition to that. And those people here who think it's a good idea for Trump to parlay with the Taliban, Kim Jong-un, potentially someone like Rouhani, I just wonder where the consistency is with the views that were held by sundry people just a few years ago.
Well, we are going to move back to Israel and the election and some other things in a moment, but I do want to address that, what you said before. Look, in the final analysis, Bret, I've always shared with you your detestation of dictators, authoritarians, and especially genocidaires and people who slaughter other people. I think that one of the reasons, I would argue, you're certainly one of the most influential columnists in the country, and the reason is that people respect your morals. They believe that you're a strong moral voice, and you have a huge following as a result, and you should never change. And I don't want to change either. Having said that, there are always going to be some compromises, and the question is, what are the red lines? I don't agree with you that evangelicals are going to continue to support President Trump's foreign policy if he engages Iran and makes concessions like lifting sanctions. Meeting with him, I think they'd ultimately be okay with that, perhaps even for the reason that Jason just said. Tell them to their face you have to stop the genocidal threats, even though I would insist on the precondition of stopping it beforehand. Especially in light of the fact, with Marion here, because I feel that Ali Wiesel was correct, that it's the one, genocide's the red line, it's the absolute red line. And genocidal threats are part of the UN Anti-Genocide Convention. The terminology itself is significant, and not just the activity. But if, to President Trump's credit, he has not, the reason why things did not go anywhere with North Korea is because he insisted on full denuclearization, and North Korea wasn't going to do it.
Actually, John Bolton did, and
okay.
Trump.
And I think John Bolton's a hero, and I miss him from the administration tremendously. And I also do not believe that President Trump would agree to Iran keeping any part of their nuclear facilities, which was the main difference with Obama, even if I disagree with this issue of preconditions. Having said all that, I do believe that this has to be in the wider context. The issue that the pro-Israel community, for example, had with President Obama was the Iran deal for sure, but it was his general posture towards Israel. And the reason why pro-Israel activists, including evangelicals, are prepared to give President Trump more leeway before they jump on an issue like Iran is they feel that he has a track record already of being very, very insistent on an Israel security framework. So there's a trust factor there as well. That and for evangelicals, let's remember, when you ask them why do they overlook President Trump's personal behavior and still support his policies, because the number 2 issue for evangelicals after abortion and right to life, the number 2 issue is Israel. That's amazing. That's such a startling phenomenon in our time that all the polls show that a bunch of Americans, 80, 90 million strong, who see Jesus as their personal savior, they're not Jewish, their number 2 issue today is whether Israel is going to be safe and secure, and they don't want Israel to give back land. That's astonishing. None of us could have predicted that 10 years ago. right? And if they see President Trump as being very supportive of Israel, they're going to support him, and they're going to overlook a lot of the personal issues in favor of policy. And with that, after you respond, I'll move it back to, would you agree with that?
No, I think their number 2 issue is the Second Amendment. That's another story.
But I'm talking about polls.
I'll just take one brief point, and that's this. You once told me something years ago that has stayed with me, and I think it goes to really the teaching of Elie Wiesel, which is, it was a startling point. You said you have to hate evil.
Right, hate evil. Yeah.
And people, in theory, hate evil, but they don't really hate evil, because we, in all walks of life, we say, yeah, well, it's a great shame that 4 million people have been killed in the Congo, but what are you going to do about it? It's awful that Assad is gassing his own people, but that's no concern of ours, right? And the foreign policy, the American statesmen that I admire, and I think who have stood the test as great leaders, are those who actually hated evil. Harry Truman hated evil, and that's why he stood up against Stalin when the Soviet blockade of West Berlin began. That's why he supported Israel within minutes of its declaration of independence. That's why he stood by South Korea when it was invaded by the North. A succession of American leaders, Democratic and Republican, have hated evil. And one of the most, I think, moving moments of the Bush administration was when President George W. Bush met the fellow who had written The Aquariums of Pyongyang. It's an incredible book, a survivor's account of a North Korean concentration camp. And President Bush cared about those dissidents. President Bush would care about the people who are marching in the streets of Hong Kong. He cared about the people who were in prison in places like Syria or China or Russia and so on. And I just wonder whether we have a president today who feels that same profound hatred of evil, or does he see everything as negotiable? That's an open question, but I think it's worth pondering.
Well, in order to answer it, I want to bring it back to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I want to phrase it in the following way. Hatred of evil means that when Hamas has a genocidal charter to annihilate the Jewish people, we call them out on it, all the terrorism against Israel. And Jason, the truth is, again, speaking about, I'm talking about your legacy as you begin to exit the White House. You have shown tremendous hatred of evil in calling out Hamas for their deplorable, abominable behavior, which has been excused by successive administrations. You were the first chief negotiator for the United States who used their international platform to condemn this evil, both the brutality of Hamas against the Palestinian people and Israel, etc. Do you want to talk about that and kind of address it with what Bret is saying is a moral failure of the Trump administration?
So I guess you're not only a good promoter, but you read my mind. I was going to bring it right to Hamas, Bret, to try to address your point. I hate everything Hamas stands for. What they're doing to Israel, the dangers that they pose to Israel, the murder, the terrorism, everything that they do. I hate them for subjugating 2 million Palestinians and causing suffering there. But if I have a choice of meeting Hamas with the hope of potentially improving things, keeping our cherished ally Israel safe, helping the Palestinians in Gaza so that they have better lives, I would probably stomach a meeting. I will not give up anything in that meeting. I will make it clear that they will never win, that the United States will always stand by Israel, that nothing is going to happen in the Gaza Strip unless they give up their terrorist and extremist ways. But if there's even a 5% chance that I can meet them and improve lives of millions of people, the same way I care about my own family, which is why I'm going home, I care about the people of the region. So I would take that meeting. Now, I don't know that that necessarily translates into all the questions you're asking. I just don't know if we could equate that with the Taliban and everybody else. I don't speak to that file, but I know on my file, I would take that meeting all day long. And if the meeting goes nowhere, and I made my point, then I still think it would have been worth it.
So Bret, you should speak to that, because I share your definition of good needing to encompass a hatred of evil. Having said that, Americans are tired of, quote, endless war. I was surprised that with the announcement of the possible meeting of the Taliban, there wasn't great outrage in the United States, even though it was right before 9/11. Many definitely felt the way you did. In fact, I felt that way. But having said that, people are tired of a war that's gone on since 2001. Trump campaigned on the end to these endless wars. The Democratic field are far to the left of him about pulling virtually every one of the troops back. That was a signature theme of the Democratic debate the other day, including among veterans like Pete Buttigieg, who served there, who said that we should have never started. He implied we actually started the war in Afghanistan. He said the way to not have endless wars is not to start them. Of course, the United States did not start that war. So what would you do in terms of negotiating with an evil actor if there is some possibility of peace?
Look, as I said earlier, I'm not opposed to negotiations. I'm opposed to exchanging beautiful letters with Kim Jong-un. This is a man who's turned his, just so we're clear, this is a man who's turned an entire country into a vast Auschwitz. Or at least, if not an Auschwitz, a Dachau. And the idea of glad-handing him and talking about the beautiful relationship and what a wonderful leader he is, I think is going to go down historically very ill in the annals of American diplomacy and statecraft. There are always opportunities for negotiation, but you have to be at least clear enough about who you're negotiating with and what you're conceding merely by taking the meeting. In the case of the Taliban, it wasn't just a meeting that they were taking. We weren't laying down a position. We were prepared to abdicate our role in Afghanistan altogether. And all of you in this room, for years I spoke to groups like yours and I said, you know what, President Obama hastily withdrew from Iraq, and the result was we created a vacuum in northern Iraq from which we got ISIS, from which we got the attacks in Paris, from which we got the attacks in Orlando and San Bernardino and everyone else, and everyone nodded sagely, yes, absolutely, you can't create vacuums. Now when it comes to Afghanistan, what do you think we would be creating if we left? Not only would we be abdicating a struggle that we have waged, not only would we be betraying the Afghan people and an elected government, we would be subjecting 18 million Afghan women to one of the most appalling dictatorships, misogynistic dictatorships anywhere. The fact that the Democrats seem so eager about this squares, in my view, peculiarly with the Me Too movement, but that's perhaps an argument for another time. In 2018, 14 brave American soldiers gave their lives in Afghanistan. And no one should minimize the sacrifice, but it's 14, okay? In order to keep the Taliban at bay, 14 American soldiers perished, and I'm not saying that that is not a real issue, but let's keep this in proportion, because right now we don't have a problem in Afghanistan. We don't have a problem that Afghanistan is a base for conducting global terror. And if we allow Afghanistan to become what it was in the 1990s, there will be no excuse for the United States to have made this mistake not once, but twice.
Okay, let's move this now to the peace plan, I was going to say, and Israel and the elections. So Jason, when is your plan going to be released?
If I knew that, I'd have a date of departure. We don't know. We have to see the results of the election now. And one of the things I resisted from day one is giving a calendar. Things happen. We just don't know the answer. That's the truth.
But you said that it would be around the time of the election. The election's now over, the Israeli election.
Oh, we don't know the results. We don't know who's going to form the coalition. We have to make a decision once we know that. Do we want to release it during the coalition, or do we want to wait for a coalition to be formed? We went through that analysis last time. We chose then to wait till a coalition is formed, and we ended up back in an election.
And how will you relate to the plan once it's published? If you said that you're, in the remarks that we discussed just before this event, quoted by the Jewish Insider, you said that you might be prepared to stay on if there's traction. You said you wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, I think my remarks were probably reported accurately, but taken out of context. I don't want to get into a theoretical conversation. My hope is, I want to get back to my family. The White House has asked me to stay for the launch of the plan. My hope is to be able to do that. We have to wait to see when it's launched, but beyond that, I don't want to conjecture, because I see how that got me in trouble at my last event.
No one really believes that any plan for peace in the Middle East can be successful without the personal involvement of the President of the United States, who can use his influence. The president is now, Labor Day's passed, we've got a year to the next election. The Democrats are gunning for him very hard. There's a very large Democratic field. They're getting a lot of attention. How could the president possibly focus on this as a priority? How could it possibly be successful if it is indeed the case that it requires his personal investment?
So first of all, one tweak to your language, a small one but an important one. I don't call it peace in the Middle East for the reason that this will not bring to peace to the Middle East. I call it a peace agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and one that hopefully connects Israel to the Arab world in a good way. What's unique about the president is, other than the Palestinian Authority today, and of course Hamas, he is widely respected in Israel, widely respected by the leadership in the Arab world around Israel, and therefore he is essential to any peace effort. But he is one, and the administration is one, that can walk and chew gum at the same time. So if there's a launch and if there's traction, I'm confident that they'll give it the time and attention, and he personally will give it the time and attention that it needs.
Does the plan involve a Palestinian state?
You've known me now 3 years. You've known that we've always stayed away from anything like that. And let me explain why. For decades, people have been using the word two-state solution. I bet if I went around this room and I asked what that meant, each of you would have a somewhat different answer. So we see no point in trying to summarize this conflict, or the solution to this conflict, this extraordinarily complicated conflict, in a three-word slogan. I know that angers probably not too many in this room, maybe nobody in this room. It angers many. They're so accustomed to using that phraseology. We think that phraseology does nothing to advance peace. In fact, I would argue it undermines the chances for peace.
Okay, but the Palestinians are saying that there is no possibility without a state. Then you have the evangelical base of the president, who are probably very much opposed to a state, which brings me to Bret. You're on record as always saying that you are not opposed to a Palestinian state if it's Costa Rica.
Right.
But it's not going to be Costa Rica. The chances of that, that's essentially saying that you're opposed to a Palestinian state. Want to clarify? Why? Because it's not going to be Costa Rica.
Why not?
Well, I don't want to engage in the soft bigotry of low expectations, to use President George W. Bush's phrase, but because history is not on the side of it being Costa Rica anytime soon.
I think when you sell people short, you get short. Anyone, I don't claim that these are perfect regimes, but there are examples in the Arab world of small, thriving societies, small countries that are nonetheless reasonably thriving societies that are trying to maximize human potential rather than to destroy it. And that's an example that you find in Abu Dhabi or Dubai and some of the other states, to some extent Oman, where I think far-sighted leaders have said, instead of doing nothing but educating our people to various bigotries, we're going to try to participate creatively in the economies of the 21st century, take advantage of our location and other things to improve societies. And there are examples in history of cultures changing rather dramatically. Unfortunately, the two most salient examples are Japan and Germany after World War II, and that was only accomplished through utter defeat and violent defeat. But I think it's a mistake to say. I really think there's an aspect of permanent bigotry against the Palestinians to say, "Oh, come on, Costa Rica. What's so hard about Costa Rica? It's not like Costa Rica is, the Switzerland of the world, but it's a democratic, progressive, demilitarized state that works for the betterment of its own people, and is sort of content to be Costa Rica as opposed to, say, El Salvador. It's not a small thing. And I think, quite frankly, the whole idea of a plan. I don't know what's in your plan, but the whole idea of a plan strikes me as in some ways amiss, right? The plan for a Palestinian state should be: we want a Palestinian society that understands that having Israel as a neighbor is potentially the best thing that could ever happen to Palestinian people. We want a Palestinian society that understands that raising their children to anti-Semitism and other forms of bigotry is ultimately going to be the worst possible thing, not for the Jews who are going to figure it out and survive and thrive. It's going to be the worst possible thing for them. We need a Palestinian state whose leaders aren't kleptocrats or theocrats. And by the way, you can travel far and wide, both in the West Bank, Gaza, and Lubbock, Texas, and find lots of Palestinians who could put this vision into practice. You just don't find them in the leadership ranks of Palestinians. Why is that? I think that's a question worth asking. Maybe one reason that is because everyone assumes, well, once we have a Palestinian state, it's going to be some corrupt theocracy or kleptocracy, and we're going to be able to say, you know, mission accomplished and shrug it off, which is kind of like the vision, you know, for Zimbabwe or something. Great, Zimbabwe is now a majority world state, and then nobody really cares what happens after. And look what happened to Zimbabwe. You can mention other states. But the vision should not be ultimately a political solution. It should be a steady insistence to the Palestinian people and the leadership that there are a lot of stateless people around the world, Kurds, Tamils, Tibetans, Catalans, even Texans who want their own state. And in order to get a state, they should prove themselves worthy of that. They should prove themselves capable of serious and in the best sense of the word, progressive governance. That is governance in the interest
But that could take decades.
Maybe it will take decades, but that is the essential nut of the issue. How you look, Israel does not have a territorial dispute with the Palestinians. If Israel had a territorial dispute, like if the issue were the Palestinians want the border drawn here and Israelis want it drawn there, then you'd figure it out. It would have been solved long ago. Palestinians have an existential dispute with Israelis. That is to say, they don't want Israel in any border. And until you're able to transform the mentality of too many leaders of the Palestinian Authority, that the ultimate goal is the destruction of the Jewish state, there's no purpose in rolling any of this out. The moment Palestinians internalize that, you should have peace right away on very generous terms in terms of borders.
Okay, I want to bring it to you, but I want to just frame it in the following way. What you just said, in all the conversations I've had where Jason has been present, and we've had 3 with Bret, that has been the best endorsement of Jason's peace plan that I've ever heard, because you've said essentially 2 things.
I don't know what his peace plan is.
No,
But you've been peeking, it seems.
No, we know elements of it. We know that, to follow your lead, that number 1, it's based on economics rather than politics. It's trying to show Palestinians the economic opportunities that peace will bring, which is what the Bahrain conference was. I wasn't there, but what I read about. That first and foremost, it's an economic plan that doesn't start with politics the way, I don't know, Dennis Ross or Martin Indyk or the other. They always focus first on politics. And the second thing is, it was to circumvent the leadership. It was to go straight to the people, right? You always said that you believe that if you could talk to the people, they might want to embrace. So those 2 elements of the plan we did always know. Am I wrong?
Yeah, so let me address the people because they came up in your remarks too, and I'm going to do something that I've started to do in the past.
Show us the map of the plan.
Yes.
Oh, you're going to give me money.
No. I have permission to read this. After I announced my departure, I got a lot of very beautiful emails from around the world, but including from Palestinians. This is an email from a young Palestinian, 25, 30-year-old Palestinian. And to me, the reason I carry it around is it really drives home the point of what we've done by talking to ordinary Palestinians as opposed to the leadership alone. I read the news about your departure. I want to thank you on behalf of myself and the Palestinian people for the honest, fruitful, and candid conversations we've had, and for giving me access to yourself, your family, your lovely family members, and your house. We had invited him and some of his friends to a Shabbat meal at our home. To be honest, it wasn't easy for me to interact with you at the beginning, but your friendliness and honesty soon made me abandon my presumptive political fears and count you as a true friend of myself and my people. I will always remember your words in our last meeting saying that your only reason for staying on the job is to help the Palestinian people. I said Israelis and Palestinians, but that's okay. And I believe and I hope that you are at peace with your decision. I hope we can keep our connection and have more of our candid conversations, this time as 2 unusual friends on opposite sides of the political, religious, geographical, and cultural specters. So the reason I keep this with me, and I'm going to read it again and again and again, is this is what we have accomplished. Will it bring peace? No, you might be right. It might take a long time before we get this mindset among many people, including the leadership, but it's out there. The question is, how do we harness this and move it forward? And I'm not sure I have the answer for you yet.
I mean, that's very encouraging to hear. By the way, can we just change the subject for a little bit?
Sure.
We should talk about
The election?
The election
Yes.
and annexation
Sure. So let's go to that, and that'll be the last thing that we talk about. By the way, that was very moving. I should acknowledge that. And when Jason announced his leaving, his resignation, whatever, I have to tell you, I was genuinely saddened. And that's why I wrote that column about you called American Light to the Nations. Because I feel that Jason, there's a whole debate going on about the Trump administration and its officials, and it'll rage on. But Jason, I think, is one of maybe 2 or 3 members of the administration, a very high-profile position, who was really nothing but lauded, even by the media. They may have issues with his policies, how he went about things, but just an American who represented sterling character in the course of his diplomacy and represented the United States as a moral nation that sought the benefits of the people he was negotiating with, Israelis, Palestinians. And I thought what we Jews call that a Kiddush Hashem, the sanctification of God's name. And since America seeks also to be a light unto the nations, that the Jewish people have this ancient biblical mandate, I really do believe that, and so thank you for reading that, because I think it captures your contribution. Let's go to annexation and the election. First of all, we don't really know the results of the election. It looks like it might have been a tough night for Prime Minister Netanyahu. I have not followed. I guess things are being updated by the hour, and we obviously haven't looked at our phones in an hour. What?
Doesn't sound good. You didn't get a majority.
Okay, well, that's what happened last time, so maybe it's the same thing as last time, and Prime Minister Netanyahu is a man who pulls off miracles, but
Sounds good to me.
But Bret, let me put this straight to you, and maybe this does affect Jason's plan, and it's kind of interesting to discuss this with Jason present. Why shouldn't there be in the same way that Jason argued at the time about the embassy, that we can't continue to ignore reality. When world leaders come to Israel, they don't go to Tel Aviv, they go to Jerusalem. And that's where all the seat of all Israeli government is, the Supreme Court and the Knesset, the Prime Minister's Bureau, etc. Well, isn't annexation a de facto recognition that some of the areas, certainly like the Jordan Valley, they're Israeli. The Jordan Valley does not have the part where the Prime Minister was speaking about doesn't have a large Palestinian population. Or the large settlement blocks. Isn't it a recognition of reality? You're not going to move 500,000 people.
Let me make a couple points. I would expect that in any final negotiation, whether it takes place next year or in 50 years, Israel would retain control of the Jordan Valley. Unless there's some broader, dramatic transformation in the region that makes that unnecessary. I don't envision that. That being said, since 1967, I think the correct legal understanding of the West Bank has not been that it is occupied territory, it's that it's disputed territory. And too many people on the left have treated it as simply as occupied territory. I think that was always wrong, right? It was always disputed. The West Bank was never recognized except by 2 countries as part of Jordan. This is from 49 to 67. And I don't think that should be the case today. But if it's disputed territory, I don't think Israel is either right or wise to annex territory. And I'll make this...
What about East Jerusalem?
Just hang on a second. East Jerusalem is separate.
What about the Golan Heights?
Golan Heights is a completely separate issue.
But why? If it's disputed, then you're saying they're unwise. Why not? Why not recognize the truth, which is parts of these areas are never going to go back. In fact, some people called me and asked me to ask Jason.
I'll explain perfectly why, okay? Because there are not several million Arab-speaking people on the Golan Heights who violently do not want to be a part of a future Jewish state. And Israel will not, look, I'm saying this as a guy who's pretty right-wing. It should be obvious that Israel will not survive as a Jewish and democratic state if it cannot sustain a large democratic majority. We're just now having an election, right, in which the fear is that one of the parties, well, that blue and white, might join with the Arabs. Now, these are Arab Israelis, and they're considered like, untouchable in terms of the political, political coalitions. At some point in the future, there should be a Palestinian state. And again, I don't know if it's in 10 years, 50 years, or 100 years. But what I do know is that we will not have an Israel that is a Jewish and democratic state if you have a huge population of Palestinians who are not citizens of that state. And so some prospect in the future has to be maintained that there will be a Palestinian state that is in some ways viable and contiguous. I don't know in what size or in what dimensions, but once you start annexing territory, eventually it's going to lead to the logic that you're going to annex virtually the whole thing. And that is going to be dreadful for Israel's politics. It's going to be dreadful for Israel's international position. And so there's always a danger in wanting, I think, too much in life as well as in politics. It will be like swallowing, I don't want to say swallowing a cancer, that's the wrong metaphor, but in terms of Zionism, it will be like swallowing a cancer.
Okay, well, let me just register, I want to bring this back to Jason, let me register that I don't agree with you respectfully, and I'll tell you why in a moment, but I also recognize the fact that I know so little about the subject compared to what Jason knows on the ground, because you've been negotiating these very issues, and your map must deal with this in some way, annexation, a Palestinian state, or whatever you want to call it, an entity, something with sovereign rights, without sovereign rights. But let me turn this around and make it a direct question to you. Based on what Bret's objections to annexation, and I haven't heard you say that before. It's like the first time I think I've heard you really...
I've said it 100 times.
Really? Well, not about the Jordan Valley, because we only heard that from the Prime Minister last week.
We're just listening to yourself.
Yeah. Well, why not listen to someone wise? Anyway, but Jason, some people said to me that, is the Israeli government knowledgeable of your plan? Because how would the Prime Minister announce plans to annex something that would be in direct opposition to your plan, knowing that the United States is such an important ally, et cetera, et cetera? Like, how do you deal with what Bret is saying vis-a-vis what Israelis want, what the Palestinians want, when suddenly the United States is a party to all this and you're having to put together a map? Do you share this with the Israeli government beforehand? Like, are we just speculating wildly here?
Israel's a sovereign country. We don't dictate what Israel should do. Our response to the announcement was that for now our policy has not changed for the time being. And I don't think...
there was no objection to what the Prime Minister said. I didn't hear any...
We said that American policy has not changed at this time. And I don't think that an announcement like that precludes the possibility of a comprehensive peace agreement. I do want to pick up on something Bret said, because I think it's very important and people lose sight of this. When people use words like occupied territory as opposed to disputed territory, you're not only harming Israel, you're harming the chances for peace. When people use the term settlements as opposed to cities and neighborhoods, you're not necessarily helping peace either. When you call Israelis settlers as opposed to Israelis, you're not necessarily helping peace. These are points that have been used for years and years and years in a pejorative way because people have thought that using those terms are going to help peace. I can tell you after 3 years, it is not the case. When people say East Jerusalem is to be the capital of the Palestinian state, as opposed to what I said in front of the Security Council about a month ago, that an aspiration is not a right, that does not help the cause of peace. So let's choose our words wisely and educate people about the conflict. There is a lack of understanding about the conflict. You know well, it's very clear. So many people don't understand it, and so many people are being convinced of things as fact that are not fact.
Well, so then let's just address those facts. Bret, the reason why I disagree with your characterization of this, and I say this knowing that Jason knows a lot more about what's going on behind the scenes than I know about, is that you're proposing something that was tried, it failed. You're essentially arguing for land for peace, whether it's land for peace and whether it's land for peace and a comprehensive deal where the Palestinians sign on, or a unilateral withdrawal like in Gaza where they don't sign on, and Israel just says, you know what, we don't want to rule over any people who don't want to be here, so we're going to withdraw. These were catastrophes, and that's why the Israeli right, look, Netanyahu, we don't know if Netanyahu tonight is going to have a governing coalition, but even if it's blue and white, they're not talking about giving up any land. The Palestinian state wasn't even mentioned by any major party in this election, because Israelis have tried that. I wish it could be Costa Rica. I wish that were a realistic outlook, not because I believe the Palestinians are less educated or less interested in self-governance or anything like that, but rather because radical ideologies are prevailing in the Middle East right now. And until those ideologies are refuted, I mean, the most courageous thing that I feel that Jason did as the lead Middle East negotiator was finally call out Hamas for what they were. Just basically a bloodthirsty death cult, more detrimental to the Palestinians than even the Israelis, for the reason that you said before. Because they weren't interested in economics and opportunity, they were interested in the destruction of Israel. Now, until those ideologies, which continue to be rampant, I mean, we could talk about all the progress that we've made with the Gulf states, and Jason really does deserve a lot of that credit, and I hope that his legacy will be to receive that credit. I say that sincerely. But let's not forget that amidst that progress, Hezbollah to the north, genocidal. They want Israel's annihilation. Hamas to the west, genocide. They want Israel's annihilation. Iran to the east, genocide. They want Israel's annihilation. I mean, you're talking about really radical ideologies. Now, Abu Mazen, to his credit, maybe, has not been sounding that kind of genocidal rhetoric, and maybe that's because of Jason. Maybe that's because of the administration. Maybe they understood that if it's saying we're never going to talk to the Americans because they moved the embassy, maybe they still understood that they would lose all international legitimacy if they spoke about this bloodlust against the Jewish people, or maybe they've actually changed. I haven't heard a lot from the PA, which is tremendous progress in terms of terminology. But how are you going to deal with that existing ideology that surrounds Israel in an arc and speak about real progress or giving them more land amidst our non-desire to rule over people that want to be there? But if we give up land, we've seen where it leads to: catastrophe, murder, terror, and the weakening, and Israel's delegitimization as an occupier on campuses around the world.
What I'm saying is that you want to keep alive the possibility that in 50 or 100 years, hopefully much sooner, there will be dramatic changes in Palestinian society because Palestinians will understand that the course that their leaders engage them in is disastrous in every respect, and that there are better models for a future Palestinian entity or state or whatever you want to call it, whether it's Costa Rica or Abu Dhabi or whatever it is, there's a better way. But what Israel doesn't want to do is create a situation in which it becomes irretrievably, in which you make irretrievable the possibility of creating a Palestinian entity or state that is not ruled by Israelis. I don't know how soon that's going to happen. And in the interim, my counsel is to do as little as possible. You know, the Hippocratic Oath applies in diplomacy as well. Do no harm. There is a certain wisdom in actually waiting on events, not trying to force a diplomatic outcome or an outcome on the ground. Jews have waited a long, long time for all kinds of things, right? The state of Israel is a fantastic place in virtually every respect. It's a good thing, right? And at some point, my hope is that Palestinians, as thoughtful, choice-making human beings, are going to make a different set of political choices. And we should be clear, and I think statesmanship in the United States and in Western Europe should be clear to the Palestinians. Here's the deal. If you want a state, these are the things you have to do. And they're not primarily diplomatic things or even economic things. They're cultural, they're educational, they're social. And when you have transformed your society so that it is prepared to be a productive member of the nations, then we're going to talk seriously about having a Palestinian state. But in the interim, nobody should delude themselves with the idea that Israel can take in 4 or 5 million Palestinians and either rule over them as non-citizens, right, or make them citizens and not profoundly jeopardize the chances that Israel is going to remain a thriving Jewish state past the lives of all of our grandchildren. And that's a thought that I think, you know, we should carry with us. The left was not entirely wrong, except the left wanted peace now, right? That was the slogan. And I'm like, peace when the Palestinians come around. How's that? That's a better slogan. But let's be thoughtful about it, because somewhere in the back of the mind of a lot of my friends on the right, it's that Palestinians are going to sort of like go away, like somehow. And they're not. They're there. And they're going to have eco-friendly tours and really nice prime ministers and all the rest of that. Really do not dehumanize the Palestinians by saying that they are incapable of that, because they are capable of it. They're capable of great things if they change some of the values that have defined them but don't need to define them.
Okay. Because I carry the title Rabbi, and because I said to you before, I mentioned to Jason that title means so much to me, I want to be clear that, of course, Judaism insists on the absolute equality of every human being as an equal child of God. Judaism insists that Islam is a great world religion like Christianity and Islam, and we never seek to dehumanize anyone. To the contrary, we want peace with our Arab brothers and sisters, which is why I respect everything that Jason has tried to achieve. So let me take what Bret said and direct it specifically, at your efforts. So Bret is saying there's a real possibility this could be Costa Rica, if not 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. Is that what guided your efforts, that economics and opportunity could really cut through? Because my issue with Bret is not about the Palestinians in, God forbid, any dehumanizing kind of way. It's a hateful ideology that we're seeing from Islamists, and the question is to what extent that has permeated Palestinian society. It's the ideology, not the people. Did you feel that economics could cut through all that? Radical ideologies, that people's desire to live in peace and to have a better life was the best way to go about this. Ignore the politics, ignore the pride issues about nationalities and who took whose land, and focus on everyday issues. Do you own a home? Are your children getting a good education? Do you have good health care, etc.? Things. Look at the Democratic debates, they're fascinating. Foreign policy almost doesn't come up at all. What comes up is people's everyday needs. Was that what drove this plan? Is that what you see the prospects for peace with this plan?
I wouldn't say it's so broadly. I mean, there's no question in our mind what drove the plan is you can't have a peace agreement without a thoughtful, successful economic component. But at the same time, the Palestinians are not interested in economic peace, so it can't just be about economy. And I agree with most of what Bret said. I'm not going to get into state, not state, but I think the point that he's making about peace now versus, what was the expression, peace whenever, whatever, is a very important point. There is no peace agreement even possible unless the ideology changes. We can't pretend that it is. At the same time, I think Israel has, even though I said we contextualize the conflict, Israel has a serious issue. So if we don't solve it, either under this administration or a future administration, Israel will have a serious issue. So that is why we spent a great deal of time baking out something into 50 to 60 pages long. It is by no means without its tough compromises, and I think we will get criticized roundly from across the political spectrum. But I think that when people read it, they will understand that this is a realistic plan, it is an implementable plan, it keeps Israel safe and secure, it gives the Palestinians something that if their society has changed, could be just as good as Israel. There are so many great things that could happen from this plan. But we also have to recognize that nobody can put down a plan that everybody's going to love. It's not possible. So I think that Bret has some very good insight into our thinking. I'm not going to tell you what is or isn't in the plan, but his description has definitely encapsulated how we've approached this.
I'm beginning to feel that Bret has seen the plan.
Maybe it's time.
We only have a few minutes. The last few minutes, let's just make things a little bit more personal. Jason, as you leave this position, was there any issue at the beginning that being an Orthodox Jew, went to yeshiva, etc., that there was the Palestinians, the Arabs would reject your being the emissary of the President of the United States because of those affiliations?
No, only from the haters on Twitter. I would say that from the minute I walked in, whether from my first lunch with the Palestinian Authority to dinner with MBS or any of the Arab world, they've only treated me with the utmost respect. And I think partly it's because religion means something to them too. So if I keep kosher, they have their version of kosher. Halal, if I have to go pray, they do that. There's religious and secular in the Arab world too, and I'm grateful that they gave me a tremendous amount of respect.
So are you saying the opposite is true? The fact that you were an Orthodox Jew made them respect you more?
I would say that those who threw the hate on me for being an observant Jew and being in the wrong job because of it don't have a clue. Yes, I would say that it was easier for me to integrate and feel thoroughly comfortable roaming around the Middle East as an observant Jew or a Jew generally who understands religion, and anybody who thought otherwise is wrong.
The president is famous for appreciating loyalty. Was there any feeling of disappointment on the president's part when you told him that you felt it was time to go?
No, for 23 years he's always been a mensch to me, and he was a mensch in that last conversation as well.
So you will continue to be close to the president?
It's hard to disconnect from somebody who you've known for so long, and he's watched my kids grow up. He's sort of, I think the Trump family is a little bit like family to us. Ivanka and Don Jr. were actually among the kvaters at my son Avery's bris, so it's a long-standing relationship. And
when the plan is released, you may or may not remain for its publication. I guess the results of the Israeli election will also have some kind of bearing on that decision.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Bret, what are your predictions for the election this evening?
I only made the only predictions that are safe to make are 100 years into the future of what the climate will be then, because you'll be dead. So it's always dangerous to make predictions. Look, here's my prediction. Israel is going to remain a thriving, disputatious democracy that respects the rights of its citizens to express their opinion and to form some kind of government that expresses a compromised version of the national will. And that's what really, that's what ought to matter. Look, I mean, Israel is a municipal-sized country with nuclear weapons. So it's on the one hand, everything is larger than life, and then on the other hand, everything is like it's borough politics in Staten Island, or whatever. So it's very difficult to make sense of how the coalition works out. I mean, if I had to place a modest guess, with very only money and denominated in pesos attached to it, I can imagine some kind of version of a national unity government between blue and white, and Likud, whether Bibi stays in that coalition, I think is an interesting question. I don't think you're going to see Israel go to a third election, but what do I know? I'm just a pundit, and for the New York Times, so I really don't know.
But you're essentially predicting a national unity government.
As I said, I'm guessing that, right? I don't know. Well, who knows? And the thing is, also, these things really turn on a very small number of votes, whether some of the smaller parties pass the threshold, don't pass the threshold, whether, Victor Lieberman is constipated, not constipated. Who knows? Like, what goes into that bizarre equation of actually forming the government? I think the important point, there's been sort of this endless sense of catastrophizing about Israel that, and by the way, the left and right in a way participate in this in an equal way. For the left, it's 2 minutes to midnight. It's irretrievably past the point when Israel can possibly make peace. The demographic clock has ticked past disaster, and yada yada yada, right? And no, it's never quite the case either. And there's a sense on the right, especially among members of supporters of Netanyahu, that if he's not prime minister, oh my God, it's just going to be a collection of merits people who are going to give away everything. What are you talking about? Benny Gantz is that coalition. Half of them used to be in the Likud. The guy was the chief of staff of the IDF. The country's going to be fine. All right, the country is going to be fine because Israel is a solid, well-founded, thoughtful, remarkable country that has performed a succession of miracles that nobody anticipated ever. They didn't anticipate that they would win the War of Independence. They won it. They didn't anticipate they'd win '67. They won it. They didn't anticipate they'd get out of the economic doldrums of the '80s. They did it. They never thought they could integrate all the Russian citizens. They managed to do that too. They never imagined that Israel would be at peace, effectively at peace, and in fact in an alliance with so many of its Arab neighbors. They're doing that too. No one ever thought that Israel would be a place you'd want to invest money in. I'm stunned by the amount of money that's being invested in Israel. So it behooves all of us to have a sense of confidence and optimism about probably, after the United States, the second most amazing political experiment in the modern era. And by the modern era, I mean from the conquest of Mexico forward. Okay, it's 1519 or something like that. People should have some sense that this country is going to be okay, and so whatever the outcome of the election is, we should be fine with it.
I want to give you a final question, but by the way, when you speak about America and Israel being the most important political experiment, you left out Costa Rica. And,
Third most important experiment.
So final question, I want to put this both to you, and it concerns President Trump, the Jewish community in Israel. And I'll start with you, Bret, and then I'll ask, Jason, I'll ask you to have the last word. You are a moral voice in the United States. It's one of the reasons that I respect you so much. I know you to be a moral man in your personal life, and I know you to be a moral voice, and a very courageous moral voice. It really upset me that although I believe you to be the most important pro-Israel voice in print in the entire country, and I don't say that to flatter you, I actually believe it, writing from the world's most influential newspaper, it disappointed me that when someone used a disgusting term about you recently, and you're a great, famous Jewish public intellectual, that the community did not rise to your defense because you have defended the community so many times against the strongest odds. And that kind of speaks to, at times, an absence of gratitude in our community. And I think gratitude is one of the most important Jewish virtues. We need to work on it. President Trump, for all of his shortcomings, which every person has been a phenomenal champion of Israel. And I think most people who are in the pro-Israel community kind of feel that way. And they may question overtures to Iran, and they may question, other things, but they feel that by and large, he has kind of proven himself. And I therefore put it to you, does he deserve more credit from very influential writers like you for pro-Israel stances, or will you look at other aspects of his presidency and say, I can't give him that much credit on the Israel question because I feel that would be too much of, of an approval rating? Meaning, does he deserve more credit?
Look, I think the history of the Trump administration should be written after the Trump administration is out of office. So we'll see. And I think it behooves me as a columnist to sometimes go against perhaps the inclinations of some of my readers when I thought it was right to praise the administration. And as I said, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, getting out of the JCPOA, recognizing sovereignty on the Golan Heights, I think those were important achievements. But they have to be weighed against other factors in terms of the president's Middle Eastern policy or potential Middle Eastern policy. And they have to be weighed, I think, also in the context of a larger question of the values of this country. I wrote a column on Saturday which was about my mother and grandmother arriving here as penniless refugees, as displaced persons after the war. And that's something that should engage us as Jews as well, because all of you are the sons or grandsons or granddaughters of other penniless refugees who arrived here speaking, I'm guessing, no English, having possibly far left political inclinations. I know that was true in my family. Being seen as alien, unassimilable, unclubbable. And look at what the Jewish community did within the space of 1 or 2 generations. I'm not talking about the first generation, but the second and the third. And we should be mindful that a core American value is that we've always welcomed our door to strangers. Not to every stranger, not thoughtlessly, not foolishly, but we have welcomed our door to strangers in a spirit of good faith, that they are mostly coming to this country to make better lives for themselves and with bright hopes for what their children are going to be able to achieve. Look at the boat people and where they are today. Look at the Hungarians who came after '56 and what they achieved. Look at the Iranian community, and I'm not just talking about the Persian Jews, I'm talking about Iranians and how much they've achieved. Look at Indian Americans and how much they've achieved. Look at Nigerian Americans and how much they have achieved. That's America. Not some blood and soil nationalism that you happen to be born at Mount Sinai Hospital or whatever. And that, I think, should inform the way we as Jews also think about the legacy of this administration.
So Jason, final question to you, the same kind of thing, but put this way. You've now been part of an administration which many consider to be the most pro-Israel administration. It's been called that by many people. I'm one of the people who called it that. Based on Jerusalem, Golan Heights, defunding, pay for slay, Palestinian policies, etc. All, I think, moral policies. But the American Jewish community continues to be, maybe some would say, not as grateful as the administration might otherwise want them to be. Bret has said that that's fair because we kind of have to look holistically, which is, I understand, in terms of Jewish values, and Bret is a great voice for Jewish values. But do you leave this administration feeling that the administration should have gotten or should continue somehow to receive more appreciation from the community? Do you feel the president feels appreciated? Does he feel unappreciated? Like as you leave now, given the kind of battles that you fought and things that you've overseen, and Pilgrim Road, and moving the embassy, and the Golan Heights, what is your feeling about the Jewish community's relationship with the president and the administration?
So first of all, I want to apologize to you. I should have spoken out, and I realize now that I never did. No excuse, I got busy, but I'm sorry, that was a miss on my part when that attack came out. So apologies for that.
It's okay, the president attacked me too.
On the, look, I'm a descendant of Hungarian Jews. In fact, I'm proud to see my aunt and uncle here, Zoltan and Judy Lefkowitz, a cousin of mine back there, Sean. So the fact that my parents fled Hungary, one from communism, one from the Holocaust. I actually penned an op-ed where I mentioned that. I gave it to the New York Times. They rejected it. I'm shopping it around. Hopefully it'll be published in the next week or so by someone else. But I'm proud of what the president has done for Israel. I'm proud of what he's done for the Jewish community. I see so much ugliness and divisiveness where people weaponize things against us, against Jews, against the president. And I would urge people to take it out of the street and appreciate everything he's done. But at the same time, let's fix our problems on our own. Let's not let people use the Jewish community in Israel for their own purposes. So that's how I would answer that question. It's gotten very bad.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much for joining us. I want to thank Rabbi Mark Wiles and the incredible people at Evangelicals for all they do in the community. I want to acknowledge that Bret Stephens received absolutely nothing for coming this evening. He is a much sought-after speaker. He volunteers his time. He has 3 beautiful children, and I'm so grateful to him because I know how busy he is, and with his writing and speaking and family. And because it's the first time I've appeared with him in public since that all happened, Bret, I want you to know how much the community loves you, admires you, and appreciates you, and how you have been our champion, right and left, conservative and liberal. When Charles Krathheimer and he was alive, it was a question of who was the more important pro-Israel voice. Since his untimely and sad passing, you are the man. You are the person who is our great defender, and don't think that it goes unnoticed. And I'm personally so grateful for everything you do for Israel and the Jewish people. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, Jason Greenblatt took a tremendous financial hit, like other people who joined the administration, to promote the prospects of peace. You have served the community nobly. You've served the American people nobly. You have been a Kiddush Hashem. I have never seen you treat anyone with anything but the highest respect and recognition. And I think that your Judaism and your American values have informed your actions. You've been a great credit to the Jewish people, the American people, and to the president. And I hope that God walks with you and shines his light upon you in all your future endeavors, and will truly be.